Alright, Doctor Who Season 2 just finished, and I have very mixed feelings about it, so let's talk about it. I made each review as the episodes came out, so you guys can see my thoughts and feelings progress as the series went on. This season didn't start off too well. Like most new seasons, this episode was largely dedicated to introducing the Doctor's new companion, Belinda. I'll go more into what I think about her story as we go through the series, but I think this was a decent introduction to her. I like that she didn't particularly want to be travelling with the Doctor. I think that could set up a more interesting dynamic than the typical please take me with you trope. As for the episode itself, I honestly thought it was terrible. There's a decent setup. The robots abducting Belinda to be queen of their planet could make for a good story, but the execution of it was so bland. Russell T Davies wanted to make an episode about the impact artificial intelligence could have on society, in case you couldn't tell from the incredibly subtle messaging. Using a rebellion framework for this is kind of overdone, but it's an effective way to tell the story, so it makes sense. However, these rebel characters were so boring, and their arcs were incredibly predictable. The whole episode felt like it was just retreading ground in the blandest way possible, and like the whole of the last season, the Doctor hardly did anything. The sequence where he hid a message in a speech to Belinda was really cool. I just wish they didn't over-explain it. This has been a recurring theme with RTD's second tenure as a showrunner. He'll have a cool idea, use it, then spend another 5 minutes explaining to us what's just happened. It's boring. The AI owl generator reveal was the stupidest part of the episode, and the fact the climax is putting two bits of paper together was, again, just boring. Alright, this is a really specific nitpick, but why do writers, especially sci-fi writers, always make little robots or aliens that say the same phrase over and over again? Do they think the audience is laughing every time this little block of metal says sweep sweep? Like I said, that's incredibly specific, but it actually just annoys me so much. I've been almost exclusively hating so far, so I'll talk about the good part of the episode. It's set up for the rest of the season. Having the Doctor and Belinda unable to return to Earth is a great idea. I think it could lead to some really interesting stories, and hopefully a better arc than last season. I was quite excited for Lux. I thought a 2D animated villain was a really cool idea, and I wanted to see the Doctor interact with it, but once again, I was disappointed. So, Mr. Ringadin turned out to be one of the gods the Doctor has been fighting lately. Like I said in my last Doctor Who video, I'm not really a fan of the whole supernatural turn the show's taken, but it makes sense to continue that here, rather than pivot to a different story. What really disappointed me is how low stakes this story felt. If RTD wants to build up this idea of the gods being the Doctor's strongest enemies and something we should take seriously, they need a bigger story than this. In the seasons I love, the Vashta-Narada, Weeping Angels and Cybermen all got two-parters that told deep, complex stories with high stakes. If these gods really are the huge threats they keep telling us they are, why are they consistently dealt with in 30 minutes? Again, everything here is just so obvious. Does Mr. Ringading really need to say don't make me laugh every 30 seconds for us to realise his laugh is important? Speaking of subtlety, I have mixed feelings about the tackling of racism in this episode. As I said in my last video, some of Doctor Who's best stories come from tackling issues such as racism, so I'm really happy they didn't ignore it here, considering it's a story about two people of colour in 1950s America. However, my issue is with how it's tackled. In the diner scene, Tommy Lee's mum asks if the waiter can bend the rules to let the Doctor and Belinda sit with her. This comes across quite naturally, but then Belinda asks what she means. Look, Belinda is obviously an intelligent person. She would know that 1950s America was segregated. This constant dumbing down of every conversation and problem is so draining, and it makes the serious topics that the show should be tackling feel like they've been forced in. I did think the animation here was really cool. Mr. Ringading looked great, and the sequence where the Doctor and Belinda went through different animation styles was a cool idea. I just wish it had a bit more development. I understand this sequence was probably kept short due to budget and time constraints, but I would have liked some actual plot points to happen while the duo were animated, rather than just one conversation. The scene where the Doctor and Belinda talk to some of the show's audience was a little weird. RTD basically admits he knows the new episodes aren't very well liked, but stays stubborn and continues to do everything that a large number of the viewers complain about. Overall, it's pretty irrelevant to the episode, so it's not too important. I just thought it was odd. Now this is a good episode. Doctor Who is usually at its best when the writers take a simple concept and spend an entire episode developing it, which is exactly what happens here. The well has genuine tension. The looming fear of having something behind you is really effective here, which is enhanced by the distorted sound design. What I really like here is that it dips into Doctor Who's history, which is something RTD hasn't done much in his second tenure. Obviously, this new Disney era is like a semi-reboot. I'm not expecting storylines to carry over from the previous eras, but one of Doctor Who's biggest strengths is the fact that it has 60 years of stories and characters to develop. So the reveal of this base being on midnight was a welcome one. So far, I've found the side characters of this Disney era to be one-dimensional and, quite frankly, annoying, but I thought Alice and Shia were quite compelling. They worked really well within the story, and their dynamics with Belinda and the Doctor were interesting. Speaking of, Ncuti and Varada gave their best performances of the season so far. I felt a genuine connection between them, especially in the sequences where they talk in front of Alice. I was really happy that Belinda was the one to partially figure out the situation. I think Doctor Who is just far more interesting when the companion is intelligent, so I'm glad Belinda doesn't just blindly follow the Doctor around. Honestly, I don't have as much to say for this episode as I do when I'm complaining, but baseline, this is what I want from the new episodes. Genuine tension, some level of fear, the Doctor and Belinda working together to figure out the situation, compelling side characters, and links to the show's history. Keep this up and I'll be happy. Lucky Day was pretty decent. It's hard to do non-Doctor episodes that are actually interesting, but this one kind of pulls it off. I quite like the decision to make UNIT a bigger part of the show since this Disney era started, so having an episode that focuses on the public's reaction to their involvement is a good way to develop that. I think Kate is quite an interesting character. For context, I'm writing and recording these segments as the episodes come out, so at this point I don't know anything that happens in the future, but I think it's pretty clear that she's going to be a villain. We already saw her red-painted nails pick up the Toymaker's tooth at the end of the specials, so I'm looking forward to seeing that arc develop. Speaking of villain arcs, I'm glad Mrs. Flood is getting a bit more screen time. I found it kind of annoying that every time she'd pop up it would only be for a few seconds. That was a good way to start this arc, but I wanted something a bit more substantial by now. Safe to say, we're going to get that pretty soon. She calls herself the Governor in this episode, which is clearly because she's in a prison warden outfit, but I think that this could be the title she uses for the rest of the series. The show is building for her to be another one of the gods, but I'm hoping she's the Master. If she is, I don't think Anita Dobson will be playing them for long. Instead, I reckon it'll be another Season 3 situation where she regenerates shortly after revealing her identity. Anyone that watched my last video will know that I really didn't like Ruby Sunday as a companion, but she was actually interesting here. I always find companions' lives after the Doctor an interesting subject that never really gets explored, so I was happy to see that. At first, I thought the Shriek was a pretty boring villain, but the switch to make the episode about online grifters was effective. Like I've said, Doctor Who is often at its best when it tackles real-world issues, so making an episode about people that weaponise misinformation to get the masses on their side is incredibly poignant, especially in today's political climate. This episode was pretty decent too. The Barber Shop was the perfect place for this exploration of storytelling, and I really liked the dynamic between the Doctor and the other customers. I thought Ariane Bakari was great as the villain. He played off of Ncuti really well. I felt the story here was a little bit weak. There was nothing inherently bad about it, I just think it could have used a bit more development. There is something I did really like about the episode though. In my Season 1 review, I criticised how little we saw of the Doctor and Ruby interacting with each other in the TARDIS away from whatever scenario they were in. It meant we didn't see their relationship develop on screen, which always made it feel like something was missing from the show. In this episode, we got a great scene where Belinda and the Doctor open up to each other about feeling accepted. This is one of the things that makes Doctor Who special, its ability to take these insane situations and alien characters and make us relate to them on a human level. It's something that's been a lot more prevalent in this series, which is why I think the episodes have, in general, been much better than Season 1. It was pretty cool to see the fugitive Doctor again, even if only for a few seconds. I have to admit, I stopped watching Jodie Whittaker's Doctor after her first season because the writing was so awful, so I don't know much about this character, but I think that she could be interesting to explore further. This was one of the links to the Doctor's past, well, future, I guess, in this episode. The other was when loads of the Doctor's faces showed up on different TV screens. The show often uses this gimmick to represent the character's past, but it still works, so I'm happy. I expected this episode to be terrible. I thought it was going to be really gimmicky since it was broadcasting before Eurovision, but I was pleasantly surprised. I do find it weird that since this Disney era started, Doctor Who has leaned away from sci-fi villains and more into a fantasy world. The Hellions here are a classic fantasy species, they're basically tieflings from D&D, it's just a bit overdone. As for the rest of the episode, I thought it was pretty good. It continued this season's strength of having compelling side characters, particularly Gary and Mike. I thought they had some entertaining interactions with the Doctor. I always like it when we see the Doctor's efforts to stay peaceful start to fail, especially when his companion's life is in danger. It was a fun mini-arc in Season 7 when 11 stopped caring about the lives of his enemies, so it's interesting to see that return here, albeit in a much more reserved fashion. It was a little weird how everyone spoke about Earth being destroyed. Obviously we've known it's been destroyed since the beginning of the season, but this episode means the only thing that was saved was the rights to Graham Norton's likeness and the history of Eurovision. Oh, and Rylan Clark. The biggest part of this episode was at the very end, when Mrs. Flood bi-generated to become the Rani. I'm not a fan of bi-generation in general, but I suppose it makes sense for this to happen to her too. Honestly, I haven't watched any classic Who, so I didn't know who the Rani was at first. I assumed it was just the Master in another language. It's cool to see this new era dip into the decades of history that the show has. I just find it a little odd that it only really dips into the really old series, except in the well. Still, I'm happy to see 15 have an overarching villain. The 11th Doctor is my favourite, and I feel like that's the one thing he was lacking, which is why Tennant's series make for the better show overall. The Silents were 11's best option, but they were dealt with by the end of Season 6 and then had a weird return in the mess that was Season 7. Oh my god, this episode is so bad. Russell T Davies continues his stretch as being the most washed writer of all time. Wishworld has such a great concept. The idea of everyone having to believe everything they're told to keep the propaganda machine spinning is fantastic, but it's just so poorly executed. First of all, why is this episode so bright? I understand it in the beginning when they're trying to portray this idyllic lifestyle, but why does the Rani's lair look the exact same? I mean, take a look at this shot from the old Doctor Who, and then look at this. I don't want to just keep saying everything was better in the past, but the visual storytelling in these older seasons is objectively so much better. This episode, and this whole era, just doesn't go far enough with its concepts, largely because it wants to stay so family friendly. There's scenes in this episode where people essentially call the Gestapo on their own family. That's a great idea for a hard-hitting moment, but it's just so downplayed. In the old series, the British government literally builds concentration camps for immigrants in an episode where the Doctor fails to save the world. This conversation between Donna, Wilf and Rocco is probably the most heartbreaking moment in the entire show. In Wishworld, the situation the country is in is largely the same, so why can't we explore themes and ideas like this in the new series too? Conrad not noticing the disabled people because his utopia wouldn't include them is another great idea, but again it's just executed so poorly. Shirley telling Ruby about this is essentially the same idea as this scene near the beginning of Andor.
They're so proud of themselves, they don't even care. They're so fat and satisfied, they can't imagine it.
Can't imagine what?
That someone like me would ever get inside their house, walk their floors, spit in their food, take their gear.
The arrogance is remarkable, isn't it? They don't even think about us.
But one is just so much better than the other. Everything in this episode is just so over-explained. New drinking game. Take a shot every time a character says,
It's May the 24th.
May the 24th?
May the 24th.
May the 24th.
May the 24th.
May the 24th.
you'd be dead within minutes. It's so draining to hear everything get dumbed down over and over again. Let's go back to that clip I mentioned from Turn Left. If that was in a modern Doctor Who episode, you wouldn't have this line.
Labour camps. That's what they called them last time.
They'd instead explain how similar the situation is to Nazi Germany, and then again explain why that's bad. This new era of Doctor Who has shown it can still be good, but only when Russell T Davies isn't writing it. I mean, look at my split of good versus bad episodes in the new era. Then look at how many RTD wrote. Fuck me. Russell, hang out, mate. You clearly haven't got what it takes anymore. Cash in your check, cut ties with Disney, pretend this never happened, and retire somewhere nice. I'm actually begging you, just give it all up and we can all be happy. Reality War is genuinely one of the worst things I've ever watched, and 3 days ago I watched Ice Sharks. The script is by far the laziest of the series. Me and my dad were predicting every line, and I don't think we got a single one wrong. The script also kept up the trend of over-explaining every single aspect of the story. Genuinely, this episode feels like a CBBC show. It's mind-numbing. So, RTD built up Mrs. Flood for 2 whole seasons, had her become the lesser half of a side villain, then had that other half be killed by a new villain that was in the show for literally 30 seconds. All for her story to finish with a fucking 2 Ronnies joke. Jesus Christ. I don't understand how the audience is meant to care about Poppy when we spent about 15 minutes with her across 2 episodes forgetting space babies. There was literally nothing hooking me into this story. Also, the reason I liked Belinda was because she was intelligent and independent. She didn't just blindly follow the Doctor around. All this story does is take away every aspect of her personality and put her in a stereotypical mother role where she's not allowed to speak or do anything if it's not directly related to her child. I mean, they literally hide her away in a box while they go and save the world. It's terrible. Russell, mate, can we please stop doing the I'm going to bring back the Time Lord story? It's so bland and overdone. It's the laziest way to try and involve the Doctor's history, which this episode doesn't even do properly. There was no reason for Omega to be here. I mean, Omega wasn't here, it was just a massive SCP-173 they called Omega, but his name was literally just used as a buzzword. The biggest talking point for this episode is the ending. It was fucking abysmal. Removing 73 yards and Lucky Days since the Doctor is barely in them, Ncuti has had 16 episodes as the lead. Eccleston had 13 episodes and had a much more complete story. Ncuti's tenure has been a mess, and it's not his fault at all. He's a fantastic actor, but he's just been completely wasted on atrocious scripts. It's the same thing that happened with Jodie Whittaker. It was cool to see her again, but I would have preferred Matt Smith or Peter Capaldi. Actually, you know what? I'd rather none of them. I'm sick of the pointless cameos just to make news headlines and make the fans happy. Speaking of pointless cameos just to make news headlines, why the fuck is Billie Piper the next Doctor? She is a phenomenal actor, but can RTD just move on from wanking over his old work and make something new? It's so painfully obvious that Tennant's Doctor has been sitting in the backlines for these past 2 seasons just so he can have a big return scene where he sees 16 with Rose's face so Russell can score some points with the fans. I'm sick of it. To conclude, the show is just as messy now as it was before this season started. Everything feels soulless and vapid, and I think it's largely due to the show's politics. Channel Pup has a great video on this that I recommend you watch, but the general point is that during RTD's second tenure, Doctor Who has included loads of modern political talking points, then not talked about them. The point of political allegory in art is to comment, educate and inform. You make Daleks an allegory for the Nazis, and then instead of just telling us that they're bad, you show their inhumanity, and allow the audience to make their own decisions based on how they perceive them. Instead, this modern era throws in political buzzwords just for the sake of it, without creating a dialogue around them. We have a so-called Planet of the Incels, but the show does nothing to discuss it. In last year's Christmas special, there's a 5-minute rant about the Tories, and yeah, they can go fuck themselves, but there's no dialogue or storytelling here. As Channel Pup says in this video, everyone that already agrees with the show's stance is still going to agree, and everyone that disagrees is still going to disagree because they haven't been shown anything to inform them or challenge the way they think. This makes these moments feel forced into the show. They don't feel natural. For example, Donna's daughter Rose is trans, but instead of telling an actual story about this, RTD said, no, she's not trans for any human reasons, she's trans because the TARDIS is inside of her. This is disgusting, man. Being queer is a regular human quality. Why are you writing that she needs a multi-dimensional spaceship inside of her to make her trans? Like, you can just have a trans character. There were more good episodes in this series in season 1, but like I said earlier, they're all the ones that RTD didn't write. He did so much for this show, and he was genuinely a fantastic showrunner and writer for seasons 1 through 4. But in this modern era, he has been abysmal, and I think the only way for the show to recover is to move on from him.